friends, welcome back to the channel. It's Tori, and today I am back to continue my underrated fantasy gems series. I'm here to ruffle some feathers and make sure that your TBR is stocked with some of the most incredible, phenomenal fantasy reads that do not get enough attention here on BookTube, in my opinion. I do think it's very funny because there are a lot of people that get very irritated at me for daring to suggest that we could read underrated books instead of super popular series. I would like to point out, for anyone who's confused about what I mean by this series, I'm not saying you shouldn't read the popular series. I'm just saying that a lot of people seem to be looking for something beyond the first layer of fantasy TBRs. The people who are looking for something a little bit past the most popular, the most talked about, and the most repeated series here on BookTube, and that, my friends, is why I'm here to help. Now, I hope that by the end of this video, you found a few to add to your TBR, and I hope that when you pick them up, they end up becoming 5-star new favorite reads for you. I'm gonna start off with The Legend of Eli Monpress. This is the kind of story that if you want just a fun fantasy adventure romp, really short books. This is an omnibus of the first 3 books in the Eli Monpress series by Rachel Aaron. This series gives you a snarky, roguish main character named Eli who has kind of a darker take on elemental magic. And in the first book, we meet him talking to a door and talking his way out of a prison cell by talking to a door. And to me, that was like the most perfect way to introduce the tone of this story. It is absolutely fantastic. The elemental magic system I really enjoyed. I think she does some really cool things on a very familiar magic system style, and I could not put this book down. She actually does go a bit darker towards the end, a little bit more horror flavored towards the end than I was anticipating, but overall this story is full of heist and hijinks and rogues and sorcerers and plot to overthrow a kingdom, and our very endearing main character Eli gets wrapped up in it all, kind of for the wrong reasons, but ends up sort of being told that he has to be a hero, and hijinks ensue. So I highly recommend this first book. I'm really excited to continue this series, and Rachel Aaron just writes in that kind of style that if you want a book that you can just carry around with you this summer and binge and enjoy, this is a great place to start. And also, like I said, they're super short, easy reads, and it is a 5-book series total. Highly recommend. This one really surprised me with how much I enjoyed it and how much I had forgotten that every once in a while I just want to read a good old-fashioned fantasy adventure with some great characters. Now, you guys have heard me talk about Daniel Abraham's Long Price Quartet here on this channel so many times. It is one of my absolute favorite fantasy series ever, but Long Price Quartet is definitely a little bit more on the niche side of what I would recommend for fantasy fans. If you're looking for something that has that classic Daniel Abraham, real organic character, nobody's really a hero or villain style of storytelling that's in a more traditional fantasy setting, then I'm going to recommend Dagger and Coin. The Dragon's Path is book 1 of, again, a 5-book series, and even though these books are a little bit on the chunkier side, don't let that fool you because I can absolutely binge through these. This series takes a traditional fantasy setting and really flips it on its head with the characters. You're left kind of being intrigued by and compelled by the characters in this series, but you can't ever really place them in a hero or villain camp. They're just people making decisions that feel very organic and will often surprise you in a good way. Add to that the quintessential Daniel Abraham, mildly horrifying and really intriguing magic system on top of this setting and the characters, and you have a truly remarkable fantasy experience. I would highly recommend this for anybody who really is looking for that pseudo-medieval nation versus nation, the inner workings of kingdoms and how they might be taken apart from the inside fantasy setting that has been flipped on its head and added with Daniel Abraham's just incredibly compelling writing style and very organic feeling characters. Next up is a book that is one of my 5-star reads from here in 2026 and a trilogy that I absolutely loved, and that is Black Sun Rising by C.S. Friedman. This is book 1 in the Coldfire trilogy, which is just, there's so many things that I could say about this trilogy, but the first thing that I'm going to start with is the prose. Where are my prose connoisseurs at? You guys know that we love a really brilliantly written paragraph, sentence that makes you pause, step back, savor, read it again, and leaves you thinking about it long after you've turned the page. That is the type of prose style that C.S. Friedman uses. Add to that the fact that she has made this an incredible genre mashup of science fiction, epic fantasy, and a heavy sprinkling of horror, and you have something truly unique that feels classic and also timeless at the same time. This series has an atmosphere that does not quit. We have a group of humans who hundreds of years ago landed on a planet out in the galaxy somewhere. That's where our science fiction comes in. And they discovered that the magic of this world is something that is completely beyond what they are prepared to deal with, completely beyond their understanding. And it is this kind of dark, fae-like magic. And when we talk about the fae, in the Coldfire trilogy, it is not what you are thinking of for a lot of the modern fae representation. It is dark, it is terrifying, and even though it is magnetizing and sometimes even seductive, it is absolutely horrifying and terrifying as it should be. And the character work in this series, if you want a deeply internal character quest, then this series is going to absolutely blow your mind. The relationships in this series are some of my favorites that I've read for a long time. It is something that I could feel like I could discuss for hours with the people that have read it with me, and I absolutely love this trilogy and think more people need to read it. Next up is a fun little number called The Book of Zog by Alec Hutson. Now, I have recommended Alec Hutson books on this series before, but I wanted to pull this one again because I know that there are a lot of people that are really into something that has a tiny bit of cozy and also eldritch horror, but usually separately. And this book does a phenomenal job of saying, what if? I love fantasy books that say what if, that really dig into the wonder and the possibilities that fantasy offers its authors. And the Book of Zog is about a creature, an eldritch horror, a cosmic being that awakens and discovers, it's trying to discover its place in the world. And if you think that just sounds really unique and completely cozy, you're not wrong, except it's also got that cosmic horror as an undertone, and it is just a fascinating combination. There is a cat that basically represents a world, which is super cool, and the little motley crew of characters that we build through this series is just absolutely chef's kiss amazing. I loved them so much. And as you can see, for those of you that are looking for a shorter standalone, something you can take with you on a weekend or just buzz through in between your longer reads, I highly recommend this. I think it is a really fun, really interesting, and different way of taking on cozy and eldritch and all of those kind of subgenres. Next up is an author that definitely deserves all the accolades that she's been given in the science fiction and fantasy universe, and that is Patricia McKillip, and I'm going to recommend The Forgotten Beasts of Eld. Now, in this book, we are following a powerful young wizardess named Sybil, and she is somebody who lives on her own. She is surrounded by these magical, mythical creatures. It is a kind of fairy tale, Grimm's fairy tales, folklore-focused story. It reads like a very ethereal storytelling style. Patricia McKillip draws you in, she immerses you in this very surreal fairy tale feeling world and setting, and this is such a great standalone also. So for those of you looking for a shorter standalone, something that you can read and just have the entire experience from cover to cover and then just sit and savor it, highly recommend this. Now, Sybil's perfect world, surrounded by her mythical creatures, is shattered when a knight arrives on her doorstep and gives her a child that he asks her to protect it. And what ensues is basically Sybil being drawn into the world of humanity and all of the horrors and frustrations and violence that exists beyond the borders that she's come to know. And I just think that this is a phenomenal book and more people need to be talking about it. All right, I've gotten in trouble when I called this an underrated fantasy before, but I don't really care because even though in this little corner of BookTube it's getting talked about a lot, I still think that more people need to read this series, so I'm going to talk about it again. And that is Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. This is a series that is more niche. It is something that on the surface does not feel like a traditional or familiar fantasy. We follow Thomas Senlin, who is a school teacher in this secondary world, who is newly married, and he and his new wife Maria go on a vacation for their honeymoon to the Tower of Babel, which is this massive, mysterious landmark that everybody has to go to be anybody, essentially. And within a very short amount of time when he arrives, he loses track of his wife. And what follows is a 4-book quest to find her again through the Tower of Babel. Now, on the surface, that might sound kind of out of left field, but what I love so much about this series is the world building and the character building, the payoffs, you guys, that go through this series. You start getting a sense of the type of storytelling that Josiah Bancroft is using in this first book, and you really start to care so deeply about Thomas Senlin and the characters that he encounters as he works his way through the tower. And just the absolute ingenious brilliance of the world building in this book. I am constantly thinking about it in my head, the way that he utilizes a little bit of that epic feeling, a little bit of that steampunk or gas lamp fantasy, and also the typical quest fantasy completely turned on its head through this journey into the heart of this very mysterious and corrupted tower. It's so good. I have read all 4 books in this series, and it is a series that has stayed with me and that I love more and more and more the longer I'm away from it and the longer I think about it. And the other thing about this series that I have to mention is the prose. Josiah Bancroft's prose is so incredibly effortlessly beautiful. There's so many parts of this story that I went back and highlighted and reread and just sat with for a while as I was reading, and that continues in beautiful fashion through the entire 4 books. I have so many favorite characters from this series, and I really want more people to give it a shot. It is something that I feel like is a little bit of an acquired taste as you're going through it, but I love this series so much, and I would love to see more people give it a try and fall in love with Senlin and his motley crew. Next up is a grimdark military style trilogy called The Last War by Mike Shackle, which starts with We Are the Dead. This book, when I read it a couple of years ago, absolutely blew my hat off when it came to just the intensity and the way that the tension of this story was instantaneous. It gripped me from the first few pages. If you want something that really leans into dark fantasy horror, where it is a conquered nation that is fighting out from beneath the heel of their new overlords, oh my goodness, this series. Oh my goodness, this series. The characters go through such an incredible arc, and the amount of time that we follow in this first book is only like 7 or 8 days, and it doesn't for a minute feel like there is an extra page anywhere that was not needed. So if you want something super intense and you really enjoy that kind of dark military style fantasy that does a lot of unique things with the world building and the storytelling, this series is so incredibly fantastic. The relationships in here are kind of put in a pressure cooker because of the survival mode that's going on all around them. And there are so many different types of characters in this series that are just, it's a phenomenal grimdark military fantasy. And honestly, as soon as I read this first book, it very quickly became my standard for what I look like if I'm going to read something that is grimdark and military. Another author that I have mentioned on this series before, but I'm going to mention again because he has multiple standalone fantasy books that I think you should be reading, and this time I'm going to recommend Pawn's Gambit by Rob J. Hayes. This is book 2 in his Mortal Techniques series, but the cool part about the series is that you can technically read them in any order. I do recommend starting with Never Die first, but Pawn's Gambit is also a completely valid entry point to the series. And what a lot of people like about Pawn's Gambit is that Rob J. Hayes takes this incredibly cinematic, wuxia-inspired fantasy world. It is very Japanese folklore. It is vengeful spirits and characters that just have these incredibly unique magical combat abilities, and the fights are just phenomenal, and the way that he plays with different fantasy elements. There's a steampunk element in this one. And the main character, her magical ability is essentially kind of she's basically a chess master, which is so freaking cool. The way that these books feel like you are watching incredible old, like, martial arts films. If you like Pawn's Gambit, there are some tie-ins in the other books in the Mortal Techniques series, which is really cool, so you can find some Easter eggs in the other books when you read them after you've read Pawn's Gambit. In this book, we follow a former military strategist and general named Yu, who is on the run after a massive mistake in her last campaign cost her everything. And things get dangerous for her again very, very quickly, and she is surrounded by all of these incredibly interesting characters, some of which are mortal, some of which are not. And I love the way that Rob J. Hayes writes his characters. It's so interesting. He has a great sense of wit and humor through these characters that doesn't feel absurd or satirical. It's just seamlessly woven in with the rest of the world building, which I love. And I just want everyone to read the Mortal Techniques series, and I don't really care which book you start with. Next up is a fantasy adjacent book by the one and only K.J.Parker. This is another one that is a bit niche because the main character, whose name is Basso, is somebody who is brilliant. He's a strategist, he is an economist, and he knows so much about leverage and what people do with their money and how to utilize that to make profit. And basically what he does is he rises to power in the kingdom that he's in, and he becomes a banker and a government official. And this is the story of not only his rise to power, but his life and the inner workings of how he keeps this country running, how he keeps the bank running, all of the way that he utilizes the intelligence that he has, and also the mistakes he makes despite being super intelligent that lead to a lot of crazy things happening later on in the book. Now, I don't think I had ever really thought about the idea of fantasy banking being really interesting, but in true K.J.Parker style, he makes it somehow incredibly interesting, and Basso is such an intriguing character. It's one of those books where even if you don't know how you feel about it when you're first reading, it's so compulsively readable, you cannot put the book down. That's where I found myself. I started reading the book and I hadn't even made a decision about what I thought about Basso or what was going on yet. And I realized that I couldn't put the book down. I wanted to read the next page. I wanted to know what happens. I was so intrigued by the world that K.J.Parker was putting together and how interesting and intelligent it was that I just couldn't stop reading. And I want everyone to experience that. I have recommended K.J.Parker many times on my channel with The Company, which is another one of his books that I really like. And I think his books are really interesting because they're just fantasy enough to scratch that itch, but they're more of a almost historical, like alternate history historical account, which I find fascinating and I think lends itself very well to anyone who is a epic fantasy fan. And last but not least, we have Miss Percy's Pocket Guide to the Care and Keeping of British Dragons by Quenby Olson. This is book one in a trilogy about a middle-aged spinster who believes that the time for adventure in her life is long past. This book is a beautiful mashup of Jane Austen heroine meets a eccentric great uncle's inheritance that includes a dragon egg. And Mildred, who is our main character, is living with her sister. She is a governess for her sister's children, and she doesn't really have, or feels like she doesn't really have a life or identity of her own. And when she is left a chest of items from her uncle, Her life takes a very, very dramatic twist and leads her on all sorts of adventurous paths that she never thought she would be on. This book is so wholesome. This is I want to read about dragons and spinsters and just feel like I'm sitting by a fire in a warm blanket while I'm reading. There is quite a bit of tension in here. Of course, there are antagonists that want what Mildred now has, and there's a lot going on there. There's a romantic subplot that I just absolutely loved. I really think that Quenby just kind of hit that perfect Venn diagram of a bunch of very opposite types of storytelling that work so incredibly well in the story that she has created here. And I can't wait to read more Mildred and more about her dragon in the next books in the series, and I wanted to highly recommend it to you guys if this sounds like a good time, because I can tell you from experience that it is. Those are my latest underrated fantasy gem recommendations for you guys. If you're looking for something a little bit off the beaten path and you're tired of the same 10 series being recommended everywhere on BookTube, I hope that this was helpful for you. I hope you find something here that you absolutely love. I hope that when you get to them, you will come back to this video and let me know what you thought of the book that you read. And I would love to know if you've read any of these, what you thought of them down in the comments below. And as always, if you want to share some more recommendations for other underrated fantasy books that you think everybody should be reading, drop those in the comments as well. If you want to check out my fantasy books, you can find the links to all of that down in the description box below. And I hope you guys are having a fantastic week. I hope you are reading 5-star reads, whether they're popular or nobody's ever heard of them before, and I will see you in the next video.